thanks everybody for joining us. We have an amazing panel coming to you right now with two real champions of independent music, independent musicians. Really excited. As you know, throughout this summit, this is very much an experiment. So, we'd love to hear all your notes, comments, feedbacks, ideas on how we might make this better in the event that we ever do it again. Who knows if we will. But a lot of that just depends on what everyone thinks of it. So let me introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into talking about what's going on specifically in independent music, independent musicians, independent labels, all of that. So my esteemed panelists, Ethan Baer is the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Head of Electronic Music at Create Music Group. Ethan and I have known each other for many years now. He was a co-founder and CEO of EDM.com. He's also been a guest on my podcast, Rebel Radio. If you want to learn some dirty secrets about Ethan, we spent a nice hour together in the studio, and I got him to share some stories. Ethan was also previously the executive director at Indie Music Group and Indie Music Publishing, and so has a long history of helping musicians build careers independently. Dave Bogan is a music creators' rights enthusiast. I understand, Dave, you have a new job, I believe, as head of third-party partnerships at the Mechanical Licensing Collective. Dave's also a lecturer at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and was a Billboard Magazine 2019 Digital Power Player. So again, two real players in the world of independent music. So I want to turn this over to you guys and kind of let you talk through, what's happening specifically on the independent side of music. I'm interested. What does COVID mean to your businesses, to you guys personally? How are you adapting, and what's changing for you?
You want to go first, Dave?
Take it.
Cool.
You can go first.
So, awesome. So I think one of the things that I would say is probably the most prominent is, obviously the touring industry is very much ground to a halt. And what that has meant is that artists and managers and agents are all in a position right now where they're trying to figure out how they can continue their business in a digital world. And there's a lot of different ways that that's happening. And yeah, it's very interesting to see the different methods that people are using. And the one thing I'll kind of say up front is that the most significant change that I have noticed is, as a whole, streaming is down a bit. However, on things that previously weren't necessarily the emphasis on streaming platforms are seeing a rise in attention. So things like lo-fi, ambient, chill hop, a lot of the things that would be good kind of background music or things that help ease anxiety, or basically like music that helps cope with being cooped up, has seen a rise. Whereas music that is very much contingent upon being immersed in some sort of experience is generally seeing a decline. So a lot of the high energy music that's very focused on a club or a festival atmosphere, we're seeing less of that, and definitely lower streaming across the board. But on things that are more catered towards kind of a calm environment, we're seeing a pretty significant spike. So that's very interesting. And then on the other hand, the switch for shows has largely transitioned from live shows and club shows, festivals, to this plethora of Twitch streamers, online festivals on a lot of these big YouTube channels, Twitch festivals, and it kind of remains to be seen how that will kind of pan out. Because right now, a lot of these artists are, I don't want to say desperate in the negative sense, but they're desperate in some sense to just get in front of people again and like maintain a connection with their fans. So there's a lot of like performing for free, even from big artists. But at some point, there's going to have to be like some sort of like ticketing or some sort of payment for these artists, because the money that they were making from touring will only last so long. They got to make money off of their appearances. But how will selling tickets on these platforms work? Like, are they going to geogate based on touring? So it's just kind of an interesting situation. Like how will managers, how will artists find ways to take advantage of the rise in certain media and the decline in other mediums?
I think that's a good point. right now we see that regardless of your genre, there's an uptick in online streaming, which has not necessarily shifted the conversation, but shifted the spotlight on our economic models and the streaming services, specifically around social media platforms where you're seeing all the live streaming now. Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, even more. Instagram has become a huge, live platform at this point, and it's drawing attention to the copyright issues that we've always had, but now it becomes a hurdle for some creators to connect with their fans. Even DJs, they're especially DJs since they're performing other people's music. So I think for me, obviously, my interest is in music rights and how creators monetize their copyrights and protect themselves, but also what barriers have we put in place that we didn't think about that has now shown to have proven to be significant barriers. And I think every platform right now is looking at their licensing models, their copyright recognition and copyright compliance models, and trying to make fast decisions for something that normally takes years. I mean, we saw with, was it DJ Nice, who had a huge, audience. But for independent artists, they still have to connect with their fan base. They're still using Facebook Live, Twitch, Instagram Live. And what I've noticed, because I'm sure like all of you, we're getting invites to these things all the time, is that the competition has changed, the kind of the landscape. Because I was a friend of mine's indie singer-songwriter, and she invited me to her kind of online Facebook show. But at the same time, I have a friend who's a comedian who also is stuck, has no live stuff, and now he's doing his stand-up on Instagram Live. And then you have people who are magicians who are like moved on to Facebook Live. So like the competitive landscape has changed because you're not just competing against other indie artists all streaming live every day, no matter what time of day it is, there's someone streaming live. But now we have now you're competing with other types of entertainment. Whereas on Spotify, you're only competing with other musicians for the most part. I mean, yeah, of course, there's podcasts, but people that are going there for music are going for music. If you're going for podcasts, you're going for podcasts. But when we talk about live video, I could watch a stand-up comedian. I can listen to an indie singer-songwriter. I can listen to watch a DJ set, which I've been doing a lot of the last couple of weeks. So I think there's this competitive landscape scenario where we talk about alternatives or indirect competitors. And then we have this issue around just the copyright hurdles that's making it a challenge for artists. But it also poses an opportunity in a sense. I've been approached by a number of brands who've been looking to create online experiences to take to try to leverage their brand and their customer base and for the most part stay engaged. And they, obviously, when you look at how does a brand stay engaged outside of their own product, it's going to be entertainment. So this is an opportunity for bands or artists to be able to partner with brands, give them certain rights, whitelist their profiles so that they can stream their music or use their music in a online programming, regardless of what it is. So I think artists have to think creatively now in terms of, okay, well, there's a bunch of chefs and they're doing online cooking classes. Can I provide music for that? There are tons of children at home and, parents are trying to find creative ways of keeping them engaged. And there are different types of online programming. Can I provide music for that? If it's appropriate. So it is a brainstorming session that has to happen, but there are lots of different interesting opportunities. Now, those opportunities don't automatically convert into money. That's another conversation. It's like, okay, well, once I figure out these opportunities to keep my music to diversify the distribution of my music, how do I monetize that, right? So understanding how the music is licensed, understanding where it's licensed and where it's not licensed, understanding where there's um, financial opportunities. For example, if you're a songwriter and you're with BMI and you're doing Facebook Live streams, then you're not going to necessarily earn royalties on those Facebook Live streams. But if you're a songwriter and you're with CSAC, well, CSAC has a license for Facebook Live, so you can actually submit your set list from your Facebook Live session and potentially earn royalties from that. So that also creates a conversation around competition between PROs. Is it more important for me now to do a CSAC than BMI? That's a question to ask. There's a lot of other things that come into having been represented by PRO than just Facebook Live, but knowing that right now artists are generating all of their consumption on digital streaming services and live video services, I would want to look at which live video services are actually paying out royalties. So that's just one kind of consideration. And then you have Twitch and TikTok from a promotional standpoint. I'm looking at those scenarios. Not every platform is going to be a monetary or monetization opportunity. But understanding what they do provide is part of putting that strategy together that Ethan was talking about. Is thinking about, okay, what should we be doing, and for what purpose? So if I'm in a band and we're signed to, or we've joined CSAC, then I'm going to probably focus on some Facebook Live shows and make sure I submit all my set lists to CSAC. And then if I'm with BMI, then I'll look at, what is BMI doing? Do they have a license deal with Twitch, or who are they? Obviously, everyone has YouTube, so that's my perspective is looking at and kind of follow the opportunity from the dollar standpoint, and that's how I would look at the strategy.
So I think I appreciate that. I mean, you both gave us a really good kind of macro overview of where the landscape is. Take us a little more tactical and what are you guys waking up thinking about every morning? Like, how has this current situation impacted your day-to-day, your kind of short-term goals or opportunities that you see in your business?
Well, actually, and I'm sorry to hop in on this, but because I'm working on a project right now that is completely a result of the scenario that we're all in. As stressful as these times are for creators, there are some creators who can leverage this time as a kind of a cleanup time. Yeah. So I did have one artist manager come to me with their producer client and say, look, and this producer is kind of mid-level producers, definitely produced some hits for some major artists and some major indie artists, work with some indie labels. But for the most part, he can release independently himself, and he also work with majors. So I would say in the middle tier career, but they're taking this time to clean up his catalog. And the manager decided to come to me and hire me, and I brought my team in, and we've been able to find already about 3 sources of unclaimed royalties that he's already had, that we're now unlocking in the U.S. and other territories. And they probably would have never taken that break to review their catalog and have me look at where they potentially can be missing royalties. So this is not like these are royalties that were created during this time. These are royalties that were created before, that they're now, because things have slowed down, they're focusing on, okay, well, let's look backwards and see if we can clean up our catalog. And we found, he's represented by a major publisher. We found that he has quite a few songs that were not properly administered. For whatever reason. We found that he had entitlements to royalties that were not properly registered on his part, not on the part of the publisher. So there are lots of things like that. I think that artists who are kind of mid-tier artists, especially because those are the ones who are the highest risk, because they are big enough to actually have income opportunities outside the U.S. from local radio and different internet, different territories, or consumption of their music in different territories. We have certain rights outside the U.S. that we don't have in the U.S. We don't really have broadcast mechanicals in the U.S. We don't have terrestrial radio performance royalties for artists and labels in the U.S. So there's things outside the U.S. That some kind of mid-tier artists actually are exposed to from their music being used outside the U.S. that they never take the time, because they don't have the time. It's not a focus really to do that legwork, the royalty forensics. So I've been working with this one client, and we've already identified 3 or 4 sources where, in some cases, there's actual checks that just simply haven't been picked up. Yeah. And in some cases, it's just messy metadata that has to be cleaned up. So I think this poses an opportunity for some level of artists to look at their catalog and make sure it's cleaned up.
I mean, I think you bring up a good point, and you know this better than I do, but personally, I've heard a bunch of stories of artist labels decided to go out and look for unclaimed money. From what I've heard, there's always money out there that hasn't been collected. Every time someone's gone to look, and maybe those are the only ones who are telling those stories, but that seems like, and again, how much is going to depend case by case, but that seems like a great way to use this time. What about you, Ethan? What's your day-to-day like? How's that changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what Day just said is very true, and now that a lot of these artists, especially in the genres that have been very much touring focused, so electronic being a great example, there's the problems that exist on the streaming side, and like in terms of master royalties and in terms of publishing royalties, those problems aren't different now really than they have been for a long time. The thing is like people are actually care now, because that's their own that's the artist's main source of income. It used to be, music was largely to drive your touring, and like I think that's been a very, very much historical thing for a long time. So the fact that the focus has switched in terms of where your main source of revenue is coming from has made all those issues that kind of got glossed over before because it didn't matter as much are now very much a focus. Mm-hmm. And I think that's in many ways a great thing for the position Day is in, and the position that I'm in as a distributor is like, yes, we've been pushing kind of awareness and caring about these things for a long time, but it almost felt like for a long time it was sort of falling on deaf ears because people's attention was elsewhere, and now it's easier to get some of these points about caring about your royalties. It's easier to get people to listen now and to care because they don't have a choice to some extent. And it's not necessarily the best that people focus on it because now it matters. They should have focused before, but the end result is like a lot of these issues, I think, that have been glossed over for a long time are now going to get sorted faster. An easy example, which really plays into what Day was saying, is for all the months I've been at Create for 6 months now, and I would say for the first 4 months, so leading up to the start of COVID, there's very little interest when you bring up publishing or publishing administration, right? Because most artists don't know what it is or don't really care, or they don't want to do paperwork for something that they don't really understand. Right. And so a lot of these artists, like the first thing that I do when someone comes and wants to sign to Create is look at all the different ways that there's potentially revenue there, right? Have they claimed are they unpublished? Have they ever claimed any of their publishing? Are they even collecting money from a PRO? Are they even affiliated with a PRO? Have they been claiming their revenue on YouTube? Like there's a lot of different places where money accrues that aren't really necessary. It's not really industry standard to collect that money. A perfect example is publishing revenue on YouTube. So Create really has kind of a stronghold in the YouTube space. We represent a lot of major publishers, a lot of indie publishers, and it's so interesting how few big publishing companies don't collect on YouTube, or they're not doing it properly. And that's kind of crazy because YouTube is definitely one of the easier platforms to collect from because they have basically different pots of money that accrue for each piece of content. So they're building up the pot of publishing revenue, and they're building up the pot of sound recording revenue, and they're building up a pot of web asset or music video asset. So it's very easy for a publisher to come and claim their specific portion. There's less complexity that goes into it, but it's also, there's very few people that have the technical ability to do it, which is silly. You know, it should be so much easier for people to go and get the money that they're due, but there's all these things that are put in the way of you being able to get your money. Because if you don't get your money, it'll go to it'll either sit around for a while and ultimately go to someone else, you know? And that obscureness around getting your money, I think is going to, there's a lot of emphasis on that to change, because there's so much more emphasis on the importance of that money. So that's, yeah, I think that's that's one of the biggest changes I've seen in kind of my daily routine, is people are asking more questions about where they can get that money, which is great because it's my company's job to help them find that money. So the fact that they care now is great, because there's more opportunities for us to make money as well. So yeah, I would say a lot of money was being ignored, and now there's activity around it, which I would say is a great thing. And then another thing that I've noticed a lot of is, especially in dance music, but I think it exists throughout music, is especially because of touring, there's a lot of labels that are built around kind of a figurehead, right? So there's artist imprints is largely what they're called, or vanity imprints. Yeah. So it'll be a big artist that is a heavily touring artist typically, and they build up a label of like-minded, similar sounding artists, not the same, but similar, that they could play in their live sets, right? And they build a label around kind of feeding the touring performances. And a lot of the artists on the label tour with the main artist, and they create this kind of ecosystem. But now that ecosystem, where it's a label, but the label isn't necessarily profitable, it's a vehicle for the team to tour together, they're having to figure out, how can we make this label profitable? That previously it was mostly just a tool for keeping content going for us to be touring, right? And so it's interesting what's happening to those labels. A lot of them are going to distributors and doing kind of, rather than the standard distribution deals, so like, you know, 10% for the distribution services, or 20% for distribution services and some DSP pitching. There's like a lot of shifting back towards kind of like JV models, where labels are now going to distributors to do kind of JVs rather than going to historically the major distributors, because they have more control, but they need a funding partner. They need a funding partner. They need someone with the technology and with the infrastructure, because they have good A&R skills. They can find good talent. They can help put together records. But they don't really know how to run a label. They don't really know how to like make it make money. They just know how to use it as a vehicle, right? So that's another interesting shift as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is, there's been an emphasis for decades, but especially the last decade, on artists moving towards independence and kind of trying to get out of standard major label deals, and also to some extent out of indie label deals, and really try and be truly independent artists, where it's like just a distribution deal and you own your catalog. And I think, tied back to what I was saying before and what Day was saying, like the emphasis on collecting all of your money and on retaining control of your royalties, I think has gone up a lot. And so these like distributors that are allowing the artists to retain control of their masters, a lot more bigger artists that historically have just wanted to be in the major label ecosystem, because they have the leverage where they're not really being taken advantage of to the extent that smaller artists without any leverage are. But at the same time, they don't own their masters, right? So if for whatever reason they end up trapped in their homes and they can't tour, they don't control that thing. They're still recouping their advance or whatever. And so another thing, advances. I think the emphasis on advances has changed a lot as well, because really an advance is a high interest loan, right? So I've done deals with 2 artists recently that, rather than taking an advance, they actually went to a bank and got a loan for what they wanted to do, and then did a no advance deal. Because at the end of the day, the advance is going to cost them more money, and it's going to prevent them from making money from their only source of income for a while, right? So they took a loan from a bank because the interest rates are so low, rather than taking an advance. Sure. So it's just interesting. Like a lot of stuff around recorded music has shifted significantly, because it's now the main revenue stream. So everyone is thinking about it more and like is much more protective of their rights and protective of, you know, what percentage they have and protective of just even bothering to understand. Like if you don't really care about your recorded music revenue and you just want your advance to like fund your next production setup or get a new house or whatever, it's the language and everything is kind of less important, but now every penny is important and getting control of your catalog is important. So all of these things are now a bigger deal.
So you touch on it a little bit, Day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's the advantage right now in 2020 of being an independent artist, independent label? Why is this better for them than those who are inside the major label system?
Well,
it's a loaded question, obviously, so you could feel free to tell me that it's not better for them. But
well, no. Here's the thing. I mean, obviously, I've always been pro indie in my career as a music industry professional supporting artists. I've always felt that even when I owned an independent label and an independent publishing company, I still had very artist friendly deals. And when I closed down my indie label, I signed over the masters to all the artists. No questions asked, no recoupment that they still owe. Just, you know, I'm no longer in business. Here's your masters back. Not try to sell it to another company. So I've always been pro indie that way, and that's something that this example is an example. There is going to be indie labels that are going to close down as a result of COVID-19. These are mom and pop small businesses. These were my clients at Tune Registry, at Royalty Claim, who at the end of the day are passionate about music, are passionate about artists, who signed artists because they love their music, and grew to a size, even with 5 staffers, 10, 20 staffers. Some of them are going to lose their business. That's the fact. And some of them are going to be in a position of compassion. And yeah, it's going to suck for them. They're going to lose their business, but they're probably going to say, you know what, here's your masters back. I'm not going to try to recoup from you because the whole world collapsed in a sense, on me. I'm not going to shift that over to you. I'm not saying every indie label would do that, but I do feel major labels would not do that. So not because they're going to shut down, because they're not, but because they're not going to shut down, right? They're not in a position to get rid of assets like that.
So I think that's fair, they have more at stake with most of the, I mean, I don't know what type of advances and recoupment that you were doing at your indie, but recouping, $1 million advance is different than recouping thousands of dollars of advances. Obviously it's a bigger company too.
Yeah, $1 million advance for a multi-billion-dollar company is the same. That's zero. Like there's $1 million marketing budgets. I spent them. So
there's also shareholders to think about in a lot of the cases though.
Right. Well, again, these are lots of decisions that an indie label can make differently than a major label for those reasons. That's my point. I'm not saying those are bad things. I'm just saying that you're justifying what I'm saying is that a mom and pop, we're going to lose some labels and some publishers. We're going to, because it costs to operate a business. It costs to have copyright research, promotion staff, marketing teams, and if you're not going on tour, a lot of the indie labels are also management companies, are also involved in tour, right? So they're not just losing off sales but they're losing. They've invested in merch. Some of these 360 deals for indie labels are very important. These are joint ventures for them. Right. So I think that. If I was an indie artist signed to an indie label, and based on what that artist knows about their state and whether or not there's gonna be live music, I would start having those conversations with my lawyer and my label now, and start thinking about what happens in 6 months when tour season is over. You've not made any money on that 360 deal. I can't record. These are serious questions, right? So I feel that indie labels are going to be hit harder because they're smaller, and these conversations need to be had. I'm using my own example from my company. It was different circumstances while we closed down, but the point is we closed down, and I made a decision to not try to hold on to the masters and recoup through some kind of promotions or compilations for my label, or it's kind of tons of things you can do to try to recoup some of the money. But I decided, here's your masters back. Do whatever you want to do with them. And I think that's going to be the scenario with some of the indie labels. I don't think that's going to be a scenario with any major label, because I don't see the major labels being affected to the point where they'll shut down right now.
One of the things I've seen is a lot of, obviously management companies are one of the hardest hit because it's essentially a company built around their artists touring. But, I think in the same sense, I've seen a lot of management companies shifting towards launching labels. And one of the things Day said is, yes, a lot of the management companies that already had labels and they were sort of set up as 360 deals, a lot of those are very much suffering because they were depending on the touring revenue coming in to kind of fund a lot of what was going out. But I have seen a lot of management companies now shifting to being labels because they have to like in whatever way they can kind of insulate themselves from the lack of touring and use what resources they have, their artists and their fans, to make some sort of money in the meantime. And I've seen a lot of those being pretty effective. And on that note, and on what Day was saying about a lot of these kind of mom and pop labels or indie labels going out of business and like how to handle that, I one of the things that I've been doing a lot is exactly that. A lot of those labels that are struggling have been coming to distributors and saying, hey, like we have 9 great streaming artists on our roster and we know they can make money, but we want to launch our own label so that as a management company, we can create operating capital internally. All of our artists can make money and the management company can be making money. So it's like, this is a setup where we can now create an additional business that will be income that's consistently coming in during the off season, or if there's no touring in general. And so just like them being more kind of using more ingenuity to figure out ways to make money off their roster. And a lot of them, like I said, they're going to distributors where, they can either do a JV where the distributor becomes kind of the funding partner because they know that they're getting access to a roster of artists that will stream very well. And they're wanting to do something like this because they want to retain their catalog. Right. So right now I'm having a lot of success signing artists that otherwise might cost a lot of money to sign. And they're not wanting money up front other than just marketing to fund the label because they just want to start something. So it's like an opportunity to get a lot of better deals, which, I think that there's downsides to that in that I've had a lot of people say, isn't that kind of like taking advantage of them? But on the flip side, the alternative is what Day was saying. These people go out of business and they retain the masters because they are desperate and they don't want to give them back to the artists. So then there's these owners of indie labels that own these catalogs that they're just kind of sitting on, and the artists don't get their, they don't really get their rights back for 5 or 10 years. So it just creates these kind of shitty situations. And, is it taking advantage of people in the sense that their assets are distressed and they need support and you can get it cheaper? I guess. But at the same time, the alternative is they just go out of business and it's a bad situation for everyone. So I think there's opportunities for distributors. There's opportunities for artists. There are a lot of opportunities, but those opportunities come out of finding ways around the pitfalls.
So you guys have both pointed out some of the opportunities, some of the smart moves that people are making. And Day, I love that you pointed out, not everyone's going to make it in their current form, right? And not everyone's business will survive intact the way it started the year. Some of that, I think, is just, it's numbers, it's luck. Some of that is mistakes, bad moves that people are going to make. And so I'm curious, what you guys are seeing or concerned about. You don't have to name names, although it's up to you. But like, who's messing up right now? What are some of the mistakes that you're seeing that you would advise people to stay away from?
I think one of the biggest mistakes I'm seeing, and I understand it, I think it's like a knee-jerk reaction, but I do also think it's a mistake, is the amount of artists that are doing just a crazy amount of free live streaming.
Mm.
I understand that they need to connect with their fans, and they don't necessarily know how to monetize this stuff, or they, for whatever reason. But I think there's going to be a switch where a lot of these artists want to start charging for their shows. And
Yeah.
so, I'm not going to name names, but there are so many artists now that are just doing live stream festivals every day, or, all
Yeah.
these festivals that got canceled are all throwing live stream festivals, right? And since we're in the middle of festival season, there's like and a lot of them are pretty big, there's
Yeah.
thousands of people or tens of thousands of people going to these online festivals. In the case of like Room Service, which was the Trap Nations festival, and Digital Mirage, which was Proximities, like these had up to 1 million or millions of people throughout the duration of the events. And those artists didn't get, a lot of these artists for these things are not getting paid. They're doing them for free. And those two I named all went to charity, all the money raised. So I'm not saying anyone made a mistake there, but in general, these are happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Like all the people that I work with, during work, they have like the live stream festivals on, or, after work, everyone's, texting about all these, oh, I'm watching Slander, or I'm watching Nightmare right now. And at some point, these people are going to realize, shit, like I've been doing a festival every single day and I haven't gotten paid for any of these festivals. And now I've basically devalued my live performances when I haven't even been getting paid for them. So I think a lot of people are devaluing their touring potential by playing so many shows to the same people. It's like your agent isn't going to let you play 7 shows in the same market in a short period of time, right? You're not going to do that. But people are. So I'm just
Yeah, I mean, this
how
is,
they cope with that, or do they pivot to charging? Will people pay to go to these events? Maybe not right now, but if it goes another 6 months without shows, will they then start paying to go to these? Would you pay $2? Would you pay $30? So I'm interested to see how that pans out, because I feel like they have to start charging. The agents have to start wanting to make money. There's just so many people, the promoters, there's so many people that are out of jobs, but that there's ways they could be making money. But the question is will people pay for it? Or how long will it take for people to be willing to pay for it?
yeah. And we see that, like, for example, Facebook is coming out with the ability for pages to charge for their live video feeds. And so, I mean, I don't have any specific kind of thought leadership, if you will, on tipping or these paywalls in this time. I do know that I personally have paid into certain GoFundMe's associated with venues that I would go to when they were open, because I knew the bartenders, I knew the door staff. I felt an emotional connection to, I'm gonna, here's $100 for this particular fund that's going to be dispersed across these staff members. So there's things like that. I think there's an emotional, I mean, not everyone obviously is in a position to be able to donate, but even $5, $10. So I think we're seeing that when it comes to venues. I personally helped an up-and-coming DJ partner with a charity to raise money during a Facebook Live. That went well, and then he did another one actually last night. There's other creative things happening. I connected a huge kind of Instagram fitness trainer who's actually my trainer. He has over 1 million followers. Connected him with a good friend of mine who's a DJ, and they just did their first live DJ live workout session on Friday.
Oh, that's cool.
It was really cool on Instagram Live. So at the bottom you had my DJ, and at the top you had this award-winning fitness trainer doing a free at-home workout. Like I said,
it's like a split screen.
Yeah, split screen.
That's awesome.
Really awesome. Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. Not, like I said before, not everything is going to be monetizable. We have to categorize these things. Like this is stuff for branding. This is stuff for engaging existing fan bases. This is stuff for capturing new fan bases. This is stuff for making money. Like you have to categorize these different activities, and then figure out, okay, well, I'm going to do, 3 make money sessions a week, and then 2 branding sessions a week, and then, 1 good cause. right? Like,
Yeah,
you can't just do
I didn't mean to imply that the artists should be trying to find ways to monetize everything, because I know that turns into like, okay, this guy is like pandering for money to like do whatever normal thing that would be expected for free. Like I
no,
get
no,
that you
I
can go
mean,
too
obviously,
far. Yeah,
I,
but at the same
I'm
time,
all
I'm
about
just
making, I'm
concerned
all,
about people devaluing their presence, you know? So it's an
I get that.
interesting
Yeah.
balancing act.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, obviously there are some artists who technically perform live 200 days out of 360 days a year, but it's different now because those were kind of siloed performances and a
Right. So do you
localized audience.
geogate your digital shows like on YouTube,
Exactly.
right? You can
Now
have,
it's like, okay, technically the possibility is the world's your audience, and if you do 200 world shows, like you're kind of you're not giving a specialized opportunity
right.
performance for any, so that's why and obviously it's not really the world's your audience, because again, I talked earlier about the definition, I mean the idea of competition. There's always been competition, right? I can go out on a Saturday night in Los Angeles to watch a magician at the Magic Castle, or I can go Sunset Boulevard and go to a rock show. I can go Hollywood Boulevard and go to a nightclub and go to a DJ show. I can there's always, right? We already had that diversity of entertainment opportunities, but now it's all online. You can click a button and move through them. I post a lot on my Facebook about virtual party hopping, where I went to three or four different DJs and live. Like last night, I went to kind of two online parties and three kind of DJ feeds. And my friends and I, we text and we're have a little joke about catching a digital or virtual Uber, and like I'll meet you in the next venue. But we're adapting and trying to make sense of the situation. But in terms of from a business perspective, you do have to be strategic. I agree that you can't do 100 free shows. I mean, you're not going to pay bills that way. And if you're going to do 100 free shows, then you better be signed to CSEC, and they better all be on Facebook Live. So it's like, if you're going to do it, like know how, like what I should be doing, what platform should I do this on, what's best for me, right? You shouldn't do something if it's not really best for your audience and for you. If your audience is not responding to your Instagram live, stop doing Instagram lives. Like, don't do it because it sounds like it's cool. If your audience would prefer you on YouTube, like, then do your YouTube live. If they prefer you on Twitch, then do Twitch live. Figure out what your audience prefers and do that. I have seen a couple of my friends who are DJs use kind of simulcasting platform, so they're kind of like across everything. And I would go into the different rooms and see, like, okay, this audience on Instagram is much better than their audience on Facebook, and they're talking to kind of both audiences, but should you just focus on the one that's best for you? So
yeah, the thing, like you mentioned, like making sure that your PRO is collecting on certain platforms, and like kind of gearing your strategy of like, am I going to perform on Facebook Live, or am I going to perform on Twitch, based on if you work with CSAC, and making sure that you're engaging with the platforms that you can properly monetize, which that's super interesting, because in the like you're saying, you have to be very careful about which ones you use. But in the live space, it's almost, I mean, in a lot of ways, I would say it's worse in terms of being able to collect on that, because a lot of venues don't bother getting their blanket license. A lot of venues don't report any of the sets, anything that's been played. Sure. So while making sure that you're using the right digital platform you can collect from is important, I would say that this situation should also make people realize, when they do start touring again, the importance of properly reporting, and the importance of venues getting their licenses, and like all of those things that kind of slip through the cracks. Because at the end of the day, if you're making $30,000 on a show, or even $5,000 on a show, like the amount you get from your performance royalties seems insignificant. But it's like, now I think people are going to be more careful about that, knowing like, what if there's another, what if there's another pandemic? What if there's a resurgence of COVID? I want to make sure that all that stuff that I'm doing now, I'm going to be able to collect on when I need it, or it's going to be revenue that's coming in. So yes,
yeah.
I think it's making people more aware digitally, but I think that that will roll over into the new normal, as the term people are
Yes.
throwing around a
Yeah,
lot.
I agree, and that's something that with, like I said, a client of mine who's the music producer and have been helping getting their catalog together and getting their royalty pipelines together. But yeah, I think a lot of artists need to do that. It's to work with your manager to organize, because this particular artist, his manager, she's been on top of it, working with me and coordinating with my team and the various consultants that I bring on board to make sure that all these different avenues of royalties they're collected. I actually wrote an ebook about this years ago called The DIY Musician's Starter Guide to Being Your Own Label and Publisher. And it breaks down.
It's a great ebook, by the way.
Thank you. I get emails pretty frequently from various artist managers and artists and even lawyers who've downloaded it and used it as a kind of a checklist, which is how I designed it, as a checklist to properly set up. My expertise in terms of music rights administration is called contribution entitlement. Basically, you wear multiple hats based on all these different things that you do, and understanding those attributions or your contribution to music will then help you understand what entitlements you're entitled to, and who or what organizations administer those entitlements in the form of rights or income participations. So I kind of intro that in that ebook because it breaks down 4 different entitlements, but there's way more than that. So like I said, right now we have an artist. I'm not going to say his name, but a lot of producers who are hip hop and pop producers are in the same predicament. For example, because they're a producer, they're used to doing LODs, letter of directions, to Sound Exchange for a income participation from the featured artist portion of the income. But then I asked the producer, well, did you do any instrumentation on this music? Oh yeah, I produced it. I'm like, okay, yeah, but did you do any instrumentation? Oh yeah, I did drums, or I did piano, or whatever. Like, okay, well, that makes you a session musician as well. And that's a totally different attribution, a totally different entitlement that flows through a different organization called the AFM and SAG-AFTRA Intellectual Property Rights Distribution Fund. So we went and searched and looked up some of his top songs, and there he was listed on their unclaimed checks. Wow. And this is pretty common. And then we start looking at, okay, well, what artists did you produce? Let's look at your top songs that were on the radio. Okay, the top songs on the radio were probably also on the radio outside the United States. And when we go and looked in Germany, there he was listed, unclaimed royalties. So it's like, once you understand these different attributions and how the entitlements are represented in different rights organizations, you start to realize, oh, wait, I'm actually generating income just because of what I did on the music or what I contributed to the music. So, again, this is a time that someone can be cleaning that stuff up and looking at it, but also going forward, their manager knows now, and this artist now knows that he's going to properly register his works to these other organizations, that it wasn't the responsibility of his publisher for these particular contributions. It's the responsibility of himself. And there's a lot of that out there. I mean, there's literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in various little funds that go uncollected every year. And this is the time to go clean it out and get your checks. When we find their names on a list, it's not we don't know exactly how much it is until the music's properly registered, and then the organization will do the accounting. But sometimes it's small, sometimes it's large. I had a producer once that when I found a royalty claim, one of our early success stories was a producer who unlocked $150,000 in unpaid royalties.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day. I had an indie artist from Brooklyn a couple years ago who just for some reason never registered his music properly. Well, not for some reason, most artists don't. And we were able to go back 6-7 years in Spotify mechanical royalties and unlock a lot of money and all dumped out in 1 month. So we got pretty significant boost of income in that month. So this is definitely the time for artists to look again, you have to be at a certain level. It's not going to be necessarily, an early stage artist
Sure.
that wasn't already touring, that wasn't getting music on terrestrial radio, that wasn't doing, millions of streams on Spotify already. But there's a huge segment of mid-tier and kind of early mid-tier artists who have been. And those are the ones who tend to be in these unclaimed royalty buckets around the world.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we have just a couple minutes before our next talk starts, but I want to ask you a couple of final questions. So, obviously we're in a time of great change, and it seems like you guys are probably busier than ever. What's, as you're looking at the rest of the year and the time ahead, what's exciting? What's giving you hope and energy?
Merchandising.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a very sharp rise from the artists that I work with, at least, a significant rise in merch sales. And I think that part of it I understand and part of it I don't understand. The part that I do understand is just speaking for myself. I mean, so far in quarantine, by not going out and eating out and driving and getting gas and going to shows, whatever, I've already saved a couple $1,000s just by staying at home. So like, one, people have, at least people that have kept their jobs and are able to work remotely, there's more expendable income, I would say, because if you still have the same stability while you're working from home, you're not spending money. You're paying rent and whatever it costs to eat at home. So I think in one sense, there's a good cohort of people that have more expendable income and they're not able to go see these artists. So they go to these live streams or whatever, and then they want to represent, they want to feel connected with their favorite artists that they can't anymore. So I've seen a sharp rise in merch, and I'm looking to start incorporating like merchandising components into more of the deals that I'm doing, because there's an opportunity there to make a lot of money for these artists. And I would say of all the artists that I've done deals with so far, whether at Create or at Indie Music when I was there, most artists aren't really tapping into merchandising. Maybe they have a t-shirt that they throw up on their website, or they sell them at their, they have their buddy that tours with them that sells shirts at the front of the venue or whatever. But most artists don't have their own e-commerce store, don't have really like quality merch. It's like white t-shirts or black t-shirts with their name or their logo or something. And so I think really tapping into that is going to, I'm excited about it because we're already seeing a rise. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for labels, for distributors, for artists as well. And I also think that, like I was saying before about these festivals and these tours, I do think there's going to be a need for these people and promoters and agents and all of the above to figure out how to monetize these digital live events. And if they can't get people to pay for tickets, maybe merch is the answer, because all of these not all of them, but the vast majority of these video platforms have like a merch overlay component. So on YouTube, there's a company called Merch Bar, where right below the video, you can have all your merch and you can like scroll through the different SKUs, and it's really convenient and really like in your face while you're participating in the stream. I know Twitch has something comparable. I think IGTV does as well. So that's another interesting way, just if you're selling merch at your tour stops, you should probably be selling merch on your live streams. And realistically, at a venue, I feel like you're much less likely to have a bunch of cash to spend on merch, and people are drinking and the merch is at the front of the show and you don't want to carry it during the show. And then on the way out, you forgot, or you're trying to get home. So I think there's a bigger opportunity to sell merch at these events, the digital events, than at live events in some cases. So I'd love to see more people tap into that. I'd highly encourage it. And I'm definitely focusing on that.
Nice. Dave, what are you seeing that's giving you hope, optimism, excitement, energy?
Well, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So if you are unfamiliar with the Mechanical Licensing Collective, I highly recommend you go to themlc.com so you can learn about the Mechanical Licensing Collective. In 2018, we passed the Music Modernization Act, which among other updates it made to the Copyright Act, it created a organization, which is now the Mechanical Licensing Collective, responsibility to provide blanket licenses to digital service providers like Apple Music and Spotify and Tidal and Deezer and so forth. Basically, it's a mechanism so that songwriters can actually get paid the mechanical royalties for their interactive streaming and interactive streaming services. Prior to this, I mean, we didn't have an organization. There were independent clearinghouses that can be hired by publishers, but songwriters never had a group. So the Mechanical Licensing Collective will represent the songwriters and publishers so that they can get paid the royalties, mechanical royalties from services like Spotify and so forth. So this is a huge thing. We technically launch in January 1st, 2021. Right now, we are working very, very hard every single day with a team that's growing, putting together all the pieces of the puzzle. We have to launch, and build out a database of all the songs in the world, and license all the major digital services by January. And then make our first payments to songwriters by April 2021. So it's important to start getting your metadata ready, not only from what I talked about earlier in regards to just cleaning up your metadata because it unlocks past royalties, like I gave you examples that I'm working on some clients right now, but also getting your metadata ready so that you can register your songs with the MLC so that you can be a part of the very first blanket licenses that will be going out to all the services. So that's what I'm working on every single day as the head of third-party partnerships. My role specifically is identifying third-party entities that support and empower publishers and songwriters from the perspective of rights, administration, data management, operations, education. So you will, in the coming months, you'll probably see some announcements around partnerships with the MLC that I will be spearheading, and those conversations are just starting to happen.
Nice. Well, thank you both so much for the great conversation, all this wisdom. I think, in these times, as in all times, we need each other. We need the guidance from people that are trying things, learning, plotting out the course in front of us. Especially, I appreciate, both of you for the work you do on behalf of independent musicians. I believe no matter what kind of music you love, it definitely started indie before the major labels catch on to it. And so, I think for the future and the present of music, our ability to operate as independents is so important. So we're going to continue the conversation and take questions through ampmusicsummit.com. If you have questions for Ethan or Day, or want to offer up some thoughts, leave us some comments there, and we'll keep it going. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
This is great.